Hi, my name is Ben Lee, and today we're going to look at the differences between setting up a keypad for scene buttons versus toggle buttons. In this example, we have two rooms, a toggle room and a scene room. They each have three zones, a whiteboard, front and rear, along with daylighting. The daylighting zone is the rear of the room. In this example, we are not constantly daylighting the space. So let's look at configuring the scenes in our scene room first. We're going to have to define what each of our zones will do when a button is pressed. Our first scene is on. So I'm going to select on and adjust each of the zones for on and save them. I'll select movie and dim the lights in the room to maybe 30%. My next button is AV with whiteboard off. So I'm going to set the whiteboard to 0, and then I'll set the other zones in the room to be bright over the desks. Then I'll set our AV dim mode, which again will have the whiteboard off, and we'll set the rest of the lights in the room to maybe 50%. Finally, I'll set our off scene. Something to keep in mind. In the scene room, the user is only going to have to press one button to get the lights to turn on. In the toggle room, the user is going to have to press 3 buttons to get the lights to turn on. And I'll show you that next. But before we do that, let's finish setting up our scene room keypad. So first I'm going to assign it to its area. I'm going to make the first button start daylighting. I'll set the second button to call the movie scene. I'll set the third button to call our AV whiteboard off. The fourth button will call our AV dim. And the center button, the light bulb, will call our off. Since we have daylighting in the toggle room, we're actually going to have to create 2 more areas because of the fact that there's 3 zones in the room. So I'm going to go ahead and create 2 more areas. Label them as toggle room whiteboard and toggle room front. I've also assigned the channels to their outputs. So now let's start with our toggle room daylighting area and set the off scene. Now we're going to need to create a sequence that starts daylighting and stops daylighting in that area. So I'm going to go to sequence 1. I'm going to add a step that starts daylighting. I'm going to add a step that pauses that sequence. And then finally, I'm going to add our off scene. So now, let's go ahead and configure the buttons on our Dolly keypad. I'll assign it to its area. So button 1 is going to be Start Daylight Linking on its press. And then its release action will be to resume that sequence. So the first button will turn on and off daylighting in the rear of the room. Our second button is going to channel toggle the whiteboard. Our third button is going to channel toggle the front. Our fourth button is not going to have any action. And then our center button, or light bulb, is going to turn off the 3 zones. We're going to do that by calling a sequence. This sequence will have 3 steps. Each step will call a scene in its respected area. First, I will call toggle room daylight scene off. Then I'm going to Control C, Control V. Then I'm going to change to area whiteboard off for its scene, and then area front and its off scene. So now when the off button is pressed, the off scene will be called in those 3 areas, and all the lights will shut off. Finally, the engines. Now, I had already set up my 2 areas with daylighting and as vacancy, but since I had to add 2 more areas for my toggle room, I'm going to need to add 2 more engines. I then need to go in and configure those 2 engines. So I'm setting them up as vacancy. I then need to go into my toggle daylighting room and set up dependency areas so that when the sensor sees movement, the engine sends those movement messages to the other two areas. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, in the scene room, a single button action is going to actually turn on all the lights to a particular level. However, in the toggle room scenario, a user would actually have to hit 3 buttons if they wanted to turn all the lights on in that space. It should also be noted that the raise and lower buttons for the daylighting area, whether it is in the toggle space or in the scene space, are going to need to be sequences. The sequence is going to have to stop daylighting the area and raise or lower and then stop fading the lights if we want those raise and lower buttons to function.